and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. I'm Allysia, your host, and I've been in a bit of a flurry of activity, sharing a lot of exercises and things like that for you to work on, and sharing lots of PDFs and stuff. But I was inspired today to just sit down and share some thoughts with you all about my teaching philosophy and how I approach teaching and how my ideas on teaching have evolved and changed over the years. So this is unscripted, so I'm just gonna be off the cuff. Hopefully we'll find some useful organization within there, so I don't plan for this to be super random or far reaching. I do intend to touch on things like my early journey and how I used to think about teaching, and the way my thought related to teaching has changed over the last 5 years in particular, as I've shifted to doing my lessons completely online, where in the past I had done them before, like in person in various forms. So that's where we're going with this. I actually don't know where we're going to end up, but those are my launching off points, and I hope you'll join me for this discussion. Let's get started. I tend to forget what year I started teaching, but I think it was 2006. I was working a lot of odd jobs. I was finished with high school, and I had no idea what I was doing with my life, as many people who are exiting high school and don't go to university or want to do. I just explored and tried new things. And among that exploring, one of the things I really wanted to do was wrap up my grade 8 RCM exam. I had been working on that with my piano teacher a little bit, but I'd taken a couple years of a hiatus during the calamitous high school years where so many of my own students have quit. I was one of those students too, but I went back to it shortly after high school. And as I was studying and preparing with my teacher for my grade 8 exam, she threw out there like, hey, why don't you try teaching? You could shadow me. You could start lightly with just a few students and see how it goes. And having nothing else going on career wise, I said, sure, why not? That sounds fun. That sounds more fun than sorting clothes for donations or selling popcorn on a street corner, or the various things that I was doing otherwise. So yeah, why not? Of course, that sounded like a great opportunity. And it was. So I basically was thrown in there with, I started with something like 10 students, which was a light load, but I think within a few months it was 40 students. And at peak capacity, I think I was somewhere like 60 students. I was doing 30-minute lessons, bang, 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 one after the other. I had a full day on Saturday. I was working every evening. It was a lot of work, but it was also really exhilarating. So if you want to learn something really quickly and make a lot of mistakes really quickly, but ideally get over those mistakes quickly too, you just do it all at once, right? That's always how it was serendipitous, because I've always approached life like that, where when I get interested in something, when I get involved in something, I want to go all in. I see this with my students too, right? This tendency to do everything all at once. They get into piano and they want to just start practicing for 3 hours a day and become as good as Beethoven. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm being a little dramatic, but they want to get really good really fast. And it's hard to summon that sense of patience that's required for long-term pursuits. So I didn't have that patience, and because of that, because I burned out like a supernova, you could say. Do supernovas burn out? I'm not an astronomer, so I should probably not use metaphors I'm not comfortable with following through on. But in any case, I sort of kind of in my mid-20s hit a wall with it, where I felt like teaching was such a grind. I was teaching so many students. I wasn't sure. I hadn't really contemplated what I wanted to do with my life in any meaningful way. So I decided to go on some kind of pseudo sabbatical and went on hiatus from my students for a little while. And I voyaged to a culinary school, and I took some culinary school classes, and then I started working in a kitchen, and that went poorly. And from that experience, and going all in, there it is again, going all in into something. I wasn't just like, doing random cooking at home. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go to school for it. I'm gonna do like all day, every day cooking. I learned that I hated doing that professionally, and actually teaching piano was super fun, especially compared to what I was doing. It was just a gloriously better. All of its flaws were super overshadowed by how difficult and physically laborious I found cooking work to be. That's not to knock cooking work if any of you do it. There are some people who were cut out for it. I'm not one of those, but I'm glad I tried. So I went back to teaching, and this time I was thinking about how I might explore it on my own terms. So I started teaching on my own. That was a big step. So prior to that, I had spent something like 8 years working with a company. So I worked at a music school. Huge benefits to that because they always gave me students and I didn't have to do any of the administrative work. I did some of the administrative work for fun, but that's a different story. Everything was kind of taken care of for me. My schedule was set. I basically just showed up, got paid, did my work. There were embedded recitals and all kinds of things like that for my students. But I lacked the sense of freedom that I knew that I could have if this was something that I did on my own. So I went into the entrepreneurial aspect of teaching piano and I did it on my own. I decided that 30-minute lessons were way too fast. I wanted to do 45 or an hour because it's less stressful. If you have like a 5-hour day, you're doing 10 lessons. That is different when you're having like a 5-hour day with 6 lessons. I'm not doing the math properly, but you get my point. There's just a lot more students. It feels a lot more fast paced. And when I had that, I never felt like I could breathe. I also wanted to build in breaks because that was something I didn't get to have. I didn't get a supper break. I just worked from 4 till 9 or 4 till 10 with no supper. So that was really challenging too. I didn't want to be the person drinking a green smoothie while I was teaching class. So I scheduled in like long 1-hour breaks, even though my hours were short, and so on. So this is turning into a history of my journey as a piano teacher. I'll speed it up a little bit. Somewhere around the time where I moved into my own home and I was able to create a home studio for people to come to, I had even more flexibility. It wasn't particularly profitable, but it was actually enough because I was living in a small town and I was living at my means. I wasn't living in a crazy house or anything. It was extremely pleasant. I had really great students. But I kept having this itch for something more, and that's where piano TV came from. So piano TV, I started pretty much the year that I had my first house. I lived there and I finally had the space, the mental space as well as the physical space to start making videos. And that journey online, I didn't know where it was going to lead. I didn't expect it to lead to YouTube fame, stardom, riches, and it hasn't. My subscriber count has been flat for many years now, and I am A-okay with that. I'm not making meme videos, guys. I'm not going to turn this channel into something that is heavily monetized. So we're just going to sit here where we're at. Anyways, I didn't know where it was going though, but the more I did videos on piano TV and the more sort of back and forth I started having with my students, the more I realized that there was an opportunity for me to create an online course, which sounded really fun. So I'd been teaching for a long time. I'd been teaching for a decade by that point, but I'd never created anything. So there's a big difference. Like, I've created videos, but there's differences between one-off lessons and maybe planning a year's worth of lessons for a student and acting on that plan versus creating a plan for my students to execute on their own, or pre-recording aspects of the tutorial for them to execute on their own, and so forth. I really started thinking about curriculum and planning. I think one big part of my journey as a piano teacher for the first 10 years was being in very reactive mode where I didn't know how to teach. I didn't know what I was teaching, and I couldn't really see past like past a student's month of growth. So I didn't have a sense of where my students were going. I didn't goal set with my students. I didn't try to have any larger organizational system. And I mean, that was just a consequence of being new. And not every teacher gets really intense into the organization. I do, because it's just sort of how I am. But I didn't do that for a long time. When I started my home studio, that's when I started to realize that if I wanted my students to succeed, I really needed to map things out. And like, a 7-year-old doesn't need to know the map, but I need to know, and maybe their parents need to know, that there is some thought out landscape. There's a point A and a point B where we're going to do weekly lessons, and hopefully they'll be fun and they'll learn stuff, and we'll do recitals and all those. But there's a longer term trajectory where maybe by the time they get to grade 8 or grade 9 of their schooling, they're also getting to around grade 8 or grade 9 of piano, where every year we're trying to meet goals and we're trying to get to a certain point in order to meet that expectation. And this is really important because when I was teaching earlier on, I was going to say in the olden days, earlier on in my career, I didn't push my students as much as I should have. And I know that some people like flinch at the idea of pushing someone because you want learning to be a comfortable experience. But man, like kids and adults have so much capabilities just inside of them that if you don't give them a little push, if you don't make things a little bit difficult, um, you're not going to see beautiful growth in the way that you would see otherwise. So I had the sense that I was teaching students, and I'd teach them for 5, 6, 7 years, and they would do quite well, but they wouldn't get as far as I think they could have. And I think I could have nurtured more growth into their lessons. They didn't um, get through as many grades or move through learning concepts as efficiently. We just sort of, I sort of went at their speed and I followed their speed as opposed to getting them to come to my tempo and do things that way. And as soon as I started planning out lessons and thinking, okay, an average 7-year-old should be here, an average 9-year-old should be here, an average third-year student should be here, and trying to map to that, while also being aware of individual variety. Not everyone moves at the same speed, of course. And also letting go of the idea that a student had to master a level perfectly before moving on to the next. I started seeing way, way better progress with my students. And I wish it didn't take me a decade to learn that, but it did. It all came down to this very simple idea of thinking through not like one lesson at a time, but the top level view of, okay, I want to get them through this book. I think they're capable of getting through this book in 4 months or 5 months. So let's map it out and try to get them through it in 5 months. And at times it's not easy, but they tend to practice more. They tend to put in more effort. And even if some weeks you have to finish a piece and it's not very good and you're moving on to the next one, it led to what I had hoped for, which was all along, which was really, really nice progress with my students. And more consistently across all of my students. Because here's one of the other things that I've learned over the years is you sometimes have students who are supremely talented for no good reason. And you over here have students who maybe are less talented, just naturally gifted. And both are capable of learning, and both are capable of floundering. And I think typically music lessons really cater to the person who's supremely talented and not so much to the person who's a little less just naturally intuitively gifted. So if I had 2 kids start the same age, 7 years old, start at the same time, one just seems to have a knack. She's great at rhythm. She's great at counting. She practices diligently. And then I have student number 2, also 7, practices just as diligently, but just doesn't have a natural sense of rhythm, can't really match pitches with her voice and so forth. The thing I learned is they can move through the lessons at the exact same speed, and that's okay, because I used to hold student B back because she didn't have as much sort of raw talent. So I didn't let her move through the music as much. She had to work harder on the rhythm, so I made her stay on the pieces longer. She had to work harder on expressive elements or hand coordination, so I made her stay on the pieces longer. And I thought I was helping students like her by doing that, but I was actually holding them back. Because, again, it's just like with school. If you think about a class of grade 1 children are all going to be at different levels. You're going to have some kids who just are so academically ready and some who are less academically ready. Every kid has a different set of strengths and weaknesses, and all kids need to learn math and reading, and there's like very basic fundamental educational principles that must be followed by all children. But at the end of the day, like not every kid is going to grow into someone who's going to go to university and pursue like office work or academic jobs or things where a really high level of cognition is needed. So even with school, especially with school, you see a massive variety of different types of learners, but they move through the grades at the same speed. And the only reason, I wish school still did this, but that's a whole other controversial can of worms. The only reason that a student would not move forward to the next grade is if there was a very significant delay in learning or some major problem with progress, and being held back a grade was a big deal, so they stopped doing it, and now there's problems with that. But again, that's a completely different story. And I would approach that the same with music. I would only really want to hold a student back a grade under fairly extreme circumstances. Like they're really stuck. They haven't put in the time. And it does happen. It happens with my adult students too, where you just sort of hit a wall with things. But sometimes if you hit a wall, it's worse to stay where you are. For the same reason, again, you have like student A, student B, different levels of raw talent. they should at the same time, because they're both putting in time. Maybe student A is generally playing each and every piece she learns a little better than student B, and they're kind of at different levels within the grade. They're still at the same grade, and they move through the entire curriculum at the same grade all the way through, because they're both like. And maybe student B has a eureka moment and rhythm comes together, and maybe student A gets really lazy because everything's come pretty naturally to them. So there are things that could shake up that trajectory. But again, my overall idea is that I think it's really important for all students, including the students I teach now, to continually push forward and break through walls by just a constant spiraling around different pieces, different concepts, and different ideas. So as a teacher, I am wholeheartedly on the side of spiral method, which is basically just what I described. It's opposed to the mastery method. So the mastery method is when you pick a concept, like say staccatos, and you teach it and you master the staccato inside out, forwards and backwards, and then you move on. I think that this approach works for some people and it works for some things, but I don't think it's great for piano, because I think you just get stuck. If you want to master staccatos, you're going to be probably doing nothing but playing one or two pieces with staccatos for 2 months straight, and it feels like it would be very difficult to make progress if you're only doing one thing at a time. Because some things take years to develop. Like there's fine coordination detail that really only become available to piano players who've been playing for a while. So I don't think that a beginner, say, could master staccatos even with a couple months, because their hands are just uncoordinated. There's just, if you haven't been playing piano for 5 years, what someone could do without a lot of extra thought, just by doing staccatos again and again in their pieces over the course of 5 years, they're just going to naturally get pretty great at staccatos after a certain amount of time, as their coordination and all of that other stuff improves. Whereas if you just sort of like get really stuck on it and you do it over and over and over again, you're doing a lot of really hard grinding work and not necessarily getting the same reward, because that's typically not how these fine motor movements develop. You can't just force them. You can't just say like, hey, well, now I'm going to play without any finger claw action. Voila. Usually that's the kind of thing that has to be worked out over a few years. Or like, now I'm going to suddenly be really good at coordinating all my chords. It's like, well, okay, give yourself a year to do a lot of chord exercises. And that's the sort of patience that I've historically been really bad at. So to circle back around to the beginning, the idea of getting really obsessed with something and wanting to do everything all at once and be really good at it right away runs a little bit counter to the way I teach, my teaching philosophy, which is a long-term one. It's the idea that we want to keep this fire kindled for the rest of your life. We want, and I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true, right? I mean, maybe not all of you are going to care about playing piano for the rest of your lives, and certainly we'll go through phases where we're more or less serious about playing piano. I go through these phases myself, and it's actually difficult as a teacher to maintain a regular practice habit outside of the teaching that I do. So, especially with other things going on. So it happens to all of us. It waxes and wanes, and that's all normal. But the idea is that you want to be continually improving for a very long period of time. You probably aren't in it to just learn how to play piano for a couple months and then impress your friends and then never touch it again. So the way we do this, and I think the most effective way to learn, is by coming back and forth to the concepts over and over in a spiral. And the reason it's a spiral and not a circle is because a spiral indicates progress. If we're doing an upward spiral, that's the kind of spiral that indicates progress. A downward one would be a different one. But each time we come around, it's a little bit bigger. We capture a little bit more. You have a little bit more confidence, a little bit more knowledge, and a little bit more experience. So maybe in year 1, we learn staccatos. I teach about staccatos in CPPA. And that's cool. And then we come around to, and we do in a few pieces in CPPA, and then in CPPB, we also revisit staccatos in pieces that are a little bit more complex while we're spiraling back around. And then, you'll get decent within a year or two at playing staccatos, but you're not doing like some really laborious drill work with it. You're just playing pieces that have it, learning about them little bits at a time. And every time we spiral back around to these concepts like chord theory or scale theory or anything like that, there'll be a little familiar, like an acquaintance. And then eventually we spiral around to these ideas in grade 2, 3, 4. And some of these ideas start to feel more like old friends, and they become very kind of ingrained and a part of you because we've been working with them off and on for so long. I've gone in a lot of different directions, but maybe the place I want to land, because I'm aware that this video is getting longer than I probably should make them. I try to side tangent, and this is not going to help the video's length at all, but I've been really, really trying to keep my videos to less than 15 minutes lately, because I know that we're all super busy and I don't want to make these huge demands on your time. But talking about a person's teaching philosophy is a big topic, and I could go for hours on this. So I'm going to allow myself the luxury of speaking a little long about it. For those of you who have stuck with me to this point, I appreciate your endurance. Thank you for working with me on this. But maybe the point that I'm driving to is I've had various phases of my teaching journey. And again, if I've been teaching since about 2006, I'm getting really close to have been teaching for 20 years. So I'm almost 40, and I started this channel a decade ago. So that's a wild thing to consider as well. So now that I'm here, what have I been doing for the last 5 years or so? Well, a while ago I had a baby, like a long time ago. There's no new babies, just the original baby. And I took off a year from teaching in my home studio because she was born, and I wanted to take a year off and do that thing that people sometimes do, parental leave. But after a year, I wasn't ready to go back to work in that sense. I was really getting more and more curious about the kinds of things that I could do online. So I made my first online course, and then I made my second, and then my third, and I went through a phase where I was doing a lot of these one-off courses. And some of you have probably seen them. I still have them up for sale, and they're my most affordable online offerings. So a lot of the courses I offer are $50. And they've been the same price since the day I released them. I haven't increased anything for a very long time. And I probably should at some point. Inflation is a thing. I suppose that it's time. But I was having a lot of fun with that. I made a book that was meant to help people create this structure to their lessons, the kind of structure that I'd been experimenting with my in-person lessons for a while by that point. And I kept having students ask me, why don't you make a course for beginners? And I was scared to do that because it's a big commitment. Having music and tutorials and lessons that stay online for people that are supposed to get them from the absolute basic beginner baby steps to, somewhat competently through the first year of their beginner stage was extremely intimidating. And I was aware that there was other good beginner materials out there, and I didn't really know how I would do it. And then I just did it, and it was great. It was fun. I had a really nice group of students, and I just kept going because they kept saying, hey, what about the next level? Hey, what about the next level? And for the last few grades, I've been thinking, oh, could I really do a grade 3 class? God, it'd be hard to do a grade 4 class. Man, I don't know if I have it in me to do a grade 5 class because it seems challenging, and it is very challenging. But I have this group of students who are really awesome, and they encourage it along. So I really like what I do now, and I'll probably keep doing it indefinitely as long as I have students who are happy to keep taking these classes. But right now, in this last year's current group, there's about 215 students between all of my classes, and there's room for more. I think probably I don't know if this would be my max capacity, but it's the max capacity I could imagine right now, would be about 50 students per class, because that's usually about the right ratio to make each class feel very exciting and fun, and there's a lot of energy, and there's always a nice handful of recordings for us to listen to in order to have our weekly live feedback sessions and talk about people's recordings and what they're practicing. But yeah, I mean, it's just to shift from one-on-one lessons to group lessons has been a major breakthrough, because private lessons are great, and I would recommend all my students take private lessons if cost is not an issue and if time and availability is not an issue. I think it's wonderful. It can't be substituted. But at the same time, having a sense of community, having lessons that are really kind of structured and structurally built with a plan to the future is also really important for anyone's learning path. I find that crucial for any new subject area I get interested in. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for, so it's the kind of thing I want to create. So The last 5 years have been that. Actually, this is coming on the 6th year. I created my very first beginner class in the year of COVID in 2020. And that wasn't a sudden transition. I'd been making classes online for a while. So while the world went online, I'd already been online. So it wasn't because of COVID. Maybe it was a little bit. But, and I've been going ever since. And I plan to go for a long time forward with this. So that's how I think about, again, I could talk for hours and I really shouldn't. But I think about music as being something like anything else that benefits from having a sense of internal structure where you can actually look at where you are and where you've been and see a trajectory of progress, as opposed to just learning random pieces and not really knowing where you're at. I have my undergraduate in philosophy now, and I'm moving on to grad school. So I have a very recent sense of that importance of progression in my life in a different way. So I like to teach in that way, to give students that. And I think it's also crucial when teaching with an online component to have a live component. So I think it would be a little inert to just throw a bunch of tutorial videos up and just let people do them whenever they want and go with their own pace and not get any feedback. I think that's the kind of course that some people succeed with, but I think a lot of people struggle with that because you just burn out at some point. You lose. There's no accountability. Maybe you don't follow the instructions. You're missing details, or you're going too fast, or you're going too slow, or all these things. Some people can self-study, but I think a lot of people, myself included, really thrive in an environment where you're given the materials to study, but then you're also getting checked every week. You're checking in with your peers. You're hearing what other people are doing. You're all moving at the same pace. And you're not spinning your wheels as a result of that. There's a lot of built-in accountability when the course is only open once per year and they move at the same pace throughout the year. So that's why I only open my classes in August, because I want a fresh batch of students that can begin ready to go in September and move through 2 semesters of music studies together, and then we take a break and then we do it again. It wouldn't work the same, and I don't think it would be as valuable for you if people just came in and worked at random times. It was sort of like, I think the courses, the one-off courses I've created are good, and I still offer them because I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the content. I think there were things I would change from a technical standpoint now, because, some of these are 7 years old and older. So the success of them, though, I think is somewhat limited or narrow. So if I have a class about songwriting, we might make some gains in that narrow field of songwriting, but you don't get the same sense of scope as when you're doing a class all dedicated to the same kind of a more holistic approach to learning. Because in my classes, you're not just learning pieces, but you're learning theory, you're learning technique, you're learning sight reading. We talk about ear training in grade 1 and up in particular, and music appreciation and so forth. So it's a way for us to do kind of everything all in one, all in like a longer time horizon. And I see a lot more success that way. I've got some pages up on my website where you can actually see the progress some of my students have made. I have a variety of students actually who have been taking my classes for, I want to say, 4+ years. And as a result, they've got this backlog of video recordings of their learning journey, which is really, really cool. So I'll link to that below. I would encourage you to check it out because I always want to spotlight these awesome people. And if you haven't taken an online class, I know that can be a bit of a learning curve. But we'd love to have you. It's a really positive group. There's a lot of really smart, bright, engaging, hilarious people and just really unique, march to the beat of their own drum kind of people in the forum. It is the best group of people. I am extremely lucky to get to work with them. So that alone, I think, would be a reason to join. And I'm gonna just, this is gonna start turning into a come on, join my class, it'll be really fun thing where I wanted to just kind of bookend my conversation on my teaching philosophy. I'll be chatting with you all soon because now that we're getting close to the time where classes open for the year, I'll be giving you more details about that as well. So if you have anything you want to add, as always, I invite you to share something in the comments related to teaching or teaching styles, or maybe some things you really like about your own piano teachers, or maybe some challenges you've had with your piano teachers in the past. You can include me in that list if you really want to. I'm fine with that. But I love reading your comments, and thank you so much for those of you who have actually endured through this really long video. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this journey. I wish you lots of happy music making. Take care.